In 2022, I got a phone call from a woman, Lisa Saltzman, who's a movie producer. She said, we want another rock and roll screenplay to be selling. Could you do a screenplay either on Jerry Rafferty or Joe Cocker? I said, well, let me look into both of their stories. Jerry Rafferty, Baker Street, he was part of Stealers Wheel, Get Back and Do It Again. He was someone who was a big drinker, big cigarette smoker, depression issues. His career kind of dissipated and he died very unhappy. I looked into Joe's story. Joe had depression issues, chain smoker, alcohol issues, but he had the high points of Woodstock. He had Mad Dogs and Englishmen. I thought these were all incredible high points. Then Jennifer Warnes decided she was going to do a duet with him and really revived his career. So I had all those high points. Then Joe, in the last 10 years of his life, dried out, got off the alcohol, stopped smoking, and really had a nice, fulfilling life with his wife, moved to Colorado. His biggest passion was growing tomatoes in his own garden. A story that had all these arcs and a happy ending after all the tragedy. So I found it very inspiring, and I was like, yes, Joe Cocker's the book I want to do. Joe was someone who was kind of disillusioned by the music business. He was someone who liked to do things at his own pace. Well, I owe the record company an album. Well, they can just wait for it. And then they would finally get him in the studio, and he'd get drunk and could only do half a song, would come back the next day. He would do the end of the song. He would be passed out under the piano. But I think Joe Cocker is rock and roll's #1 interpreter. He would take songs that had been hits by other people. Once he got a hold of the songs, it became a Joe Cocker song. He would do it with Ray Charles songs. That would be like a big hit on an album. Unbreak My Heart. He would take Beatles things like A Little Help from My Friends, and all of a sudden it became a Joe Cocker associated song. And the thing was, his first single, I'll Cry Instead, was from the Help album, and it did not become a hit. So his first chance at recording was sort of a flop, and Decca Records ended up dropping him after it didn't become a success. He goes back in the studio and records still another Beatles song. It becomes a #1 hit. Through his career, I found that he did 9 different Beatles songs, right up to the movie All Across the Universe. Joe appeared in that movie and was singing Come Together, and that was the final Beatles song that he did. It was always a rumor that Joe had cerebral palsy or was given to seizures of epileptic seizures. That wasn't the case at all. At the very beginning of his singing career, his band didn't have a drummer, so he was the drummer and the lead singer. So he was drumming while lead singing. Well, finally they said, you sing better than you are a drummer. You need to get out front. We'll find a drummer. Although he played the drums with his band, he was a frustrated guitar player. So what you saw was his interpretation of being a drummer, being a guitarist with his hand, and all those spastic movements that he did mid-concert. He did not have a physical condition that made him do that. I don't know, it somehow got the music and the energy out of him. He had to do that. He couldn't just stand still. John Belushi had been doing Joe Cocker as a parody. He had done it in a National Lampoon movie. When Joe was booked on Saturday Night Live, his manager at the time, Michael Lang, said, Joe is very unpredictable. Well, we want to book him anyway. John Belushi really wants him on the show. So the idea that Joe was going to be in the Saturday Night Live studio, John Belushi came up with this idea that he was going to stand beside him, come out on stage, and be his mirror image and do his Joe Cocker impression with Joe. Well, Joe knew that something was going on, and at one point, if you look at it, he looks kind of startled to see John Belushi dressed in an identical outfit doing him. It was one of the funniest high points of Joe's career. And people think, oh my God, Joe, you must be so insulted by this guy. No, I think it's brilliant. He loved it. He felt like he was being done tribute by John Belushi. He was someone who I think was kind of misunderstood in a way, and he had depression issues. So when things didn't work out his way, he would often just go home and get drunk and lick his wounds. This is very unflattering to talk about, but I discovered that he had this habit of drinking before a show, drinking during a show, vomiting during a show behind the piano, continuing to drink and continuing to sing and finish the show. Joe put himself through the worst rigors. He was his own worst enemy. I compare him to Vincent van Gogh. What amazing pictures. But would you really want this absinthe junkie in your living room? Joe Cocker, what an amazing singer. Would you really want to hang out with him and emulate what he did to himself? He was someone who, although he was incredibly self-destructive and incredibly suspicious of the record company's motives, would create some of the most memorable music of his era. You Are So Beautiful, an amazing song. I think that song will live on as really the theme for Joe's life.